Hello and welcome to the Professional Home Buyer Seller series of videos. I'm Pete Boer, and with my business partner Beth Campbell, we are the Community Realty Group. To view additional videos in this series, simply go to our website at www.thecommunityrealtygroup. We hope you enjoy the show.
I'm here with Terry Shank, and she's one of the partners in the law firm of Murphy & Shank. Terry's been practicing law for 15 years and specializes in both residential and finance law. I'm here with Terry Shank, and she's going to answer a few questions on the role of a closing attorney. Terry, our first question to you in this series is, what does a closing attorney do?
Well, Beth, contrary to what a lot of people think, we do a lot more than just point at the paper and say sign here, sign here, sign here during the closing. We do a lot of stuff behind the scenes that the parties are not privy to, as far as clearing the title, making sure there are no liens, judgments, or anything that could affect the buyer's interest in the property since they're purchasing the home, as well as the lender's interest in the property, the new lender. So we'll collect all the information for payoffs on mortgages, if there are tax payoffs due. Homeowners association liens are quite common these days. Then we make sure when the deeds come back from recording that they've been recorded properly and in the proper order, and then also to make sure any payoffs that we submitted for the closing, those liens have actually been canceled in the public record so that the buyer and the new lender do have clear title to the property.
I thought title companies closed the transaction. Do they? Or?
Well, in some states they do. A title or an escrow company can handle the closing. However, in Georgia, the Supreme Court has ruled that conveyancing of title to property is the practice of law, which is why in Georgia an attorney is the only one that can handle a transaction, and that's for a purchase or a refinance of an existing mortgage. So an attorney would have to do that.
Okay. And once we have a contract on the house, until it can go to closing, about how long does that take? How much time do you need to make sure it's got clear title and all?
Well, we can clear a title pretty quickly. I mean, you would think there would be a lot of liens on a lot of properties, and we are seeing more these days just with the economy the way that it is, and people aren't paying their federal taxes or their income taxes, and so we are taking a little bit more time to clear it, but it's generally a pretty quick process. We can usually do it in about a week, week to 7 days, if everything goes smoothly and the parties are cooperating.
What's a HUD-1?
A HUD-1 is a federally created document just to simplify where all the numbers go on the settlement statement. So when you get to closing, everybody's looking at the same form, and it's pretty much in the same format. The government doesn't require that you use a certain software program, but the numbers and how you show everything has to be the same thing. And a HUD-1 statement, the settlement statement is what it's also called, is provided for closing so the buyer and the seller know what the figures are. And it is not required on a cash closing, although most closing attorneys, our firm included, will go ahead and use a HUD-1 on a cash closing also, because that's just the format that most people are familiar with.
Should a buyer and seller be able to see a HUD a certain amount of time prior to a closing?
Well, actually, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, also called RESPA, does state that the borrower is entitled to see a settlement statement 24 hours in advance of closing. However, that doesn't always happen. So if you don't see your settlement statement within 24 hours in advance, it's well within the borrower's right to tell their lender, well, you know, I want to postpone closing until I do have 24 hours at least to review my settlement statement, or I can waive that so we can go ahead and proceed to closing as scheduled. And the closing attorney, speaking for myself and the attorneys in our firm, we are very thorough in going through the settlement statement and all the documents with the borrower and the seller to make sure they understand it and that what they were expecting to happen at closing is what is happening at closing, so there are no surprises.
When I review a HUD for a client prior to closing, I always go over the two things I try to check the most are the HOA fees and the taxes, and obviously any kind of closing costs that might be paid by the seller. What do you advise a client to look at most on the HUD statement? Where do you see the most mistakes?
Well, the mistakes have actually gone down quite dramatically since the government changed the formatting for the good faith estimate and the settlement statement, so that when you get to closing, the good faith estimate and the settlement statement, they need to be in the very, very close together in the same ballpark. It used to be it was all over the place. You'd come to closing and it might be $3,000 difference. That doesn't happen anymore. So that's a really good positive thing to have happened with those new regulations. So we don't really see too many errors anymore, and when we do, typically the lender is curing them at the table, though the lender does have 30 days by law after closing to cure any variance that is outside the tolerance permitted.
Oh wow. And if it's outside that area, does the closing then have to wait a day or two or a week before it can close?
No, not necessarily. I mean, typically, the lenders want it to close, so they'll typically go ahead and cure it right then. But if they don't cure it right then, so long as they cure it with the borrower within 30 days of closing, and that may mean that they, send them a check or do a principal reduction, however they're going to take that cure, and as long as that happens within 30 days of closing, then they're well within the guidelines.
Fantastic, fantastic. As an attorney, what are you going to ask the buyer and seller to do during the closing?
A buyer needs to make sure that they bring a valid photo identification, and that would be government issued, such as a driver's license, passport, or military ID. A lot of lenders are also asking for a secondary form of ID, so a social security card, your health insurance card. If you bring a credit card, that's fine too. And then also you want to make sure you check with your loan officer to be sure that if there are any conditions needed for funding, such as copies of bank statements or mutual fund statements, something like that, that also comes to closing with you, so we can provide that in the closing package back to the lender. As far as proceeds for closing, Georgia law requires that anything above $5,000 has to be collected funds, and collected means actually in my bank account so that I can fund the loan. So that means those funds would have to be wired in. If it's below $5,000, we can certainly accept a cashier's check or a money order for that.
Okay. Can I use any attorney, or why is it important to have a good attorney?
Well, it's important for most people. Your home is the biggest purchase you're ever going to make, and you want to make sure that you're using an attorney who practices real estate on a regular basis. You wouldn't go to your pediatrician to have open heart surgery, even though he's a very highly skilled pediatrician. That's not the area of medicine that he practices. Just like you wouldn't necessarily want to use a real estate attorney to handle your criminal defense case. You need a very specialized practice to make sure that things are done properly, done according to law, and also done according to title standards, so that your title is clear and you own the property outright.
So then I don't want to go to an attorney that specializes in everything. I need to make sure, because it is the biggest purchase of my life, that I absolutely go to somebody that specializes in that field.
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Terry, what is title insurance and why do I need it?
Title insurance is an insurance policy, as you would guess, that you purchase to protect your home. There are two types of title insurance. There's lender's title insurance and owner's title insurance. Lender's title insurance protects the lender. Owner's title insurance protects the buyer. And you might ask yourself, well, if the lender has title insurance, why do I, as the buyer, need title insurance? And you need it to protect your equity in the home. The lender's policy is only protecting the outstanding mortgage amount. So as you pay down your outstanding mortgage, your equity is increasing. So you want to protect that equity with an owner's title insurance policy.
So if I don't have the owner's title insurance, whatever equity I have in the home, if there is ever a claim placed against it, I'm out of luck.
You would possibly lose your equity in the home. Yes.
Don't ever buy a house without owner's title insurance. You heard it here first.
That's very good advice.
Okay. What will my closing be like, and how long can I expect it to take?
Well, it really just depends on the parties. If they have a lot of questions, which is very natural, especially with first-time home buyers, the closing can take up to an hour or so. For us, we are pretty good about we go through every single document that's signed, make sure the buyer and the seller also understands their documents, and we can usually get a closing done in about 40 minutes for a purchase and maybe 25 or so for a refinance.
And if it's a cash sale, it's probably a whole lot quicker.
Oh, cash sales, probably about 15 minutes. If that's,
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fast.
Okay. And if I'm selling the home, what do I need to bring?
Well, hopefully you will not have to bring cash, but unfortunately that is happening a lot these days.
Yeah, it is.
But the seller also needs to bring a valid form of identification, driver's license or passport.
Okay.
And that's really about it. Everything from the buyer side, from the seller side, we typically collect from the seller during the closing process because we need it to clear title.
So it's fairly easy for the seller then.
Yeah, the seller gets to sit back and relax for the most part, yes.
And eat the wonderful chocolates in the bowl.
And the more they eat, the less I eat, so that's all good.
All right, Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And this concludes our series on why choosing the correct closing attorney is so important in your real estate transaction. Thank you so much, and we hope this helps.